Hello there, welcome to Inquiring Minds. My name is Doug and I'm back with another Pen Resurrection Sunday video. I'm really excited about today's resurrection. This is a 1935 Parker Vacumatic Lockdown in Burgundy Pearl celluloid, and it's an absolute beauty. I got into a last-minute bidding war on eBay to purchase this pen and paid a lot more than I expected. It is a gorgeous burgundy color, which I was lusting after.
Yes! 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 Oh! 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 Oh, God. Oh.
I'll have what she's having.
It is a first-generation Vacumatic with double jewels, a lockdown aluminum filler, and with a section the same breathtakingly beautiful burgundy pearl celluloid as the cap and barrel. I know I said my golden pearl Vacumatic was my keeper, but it may have been replaced, because this one writes like a dream with a broad wet line, as you'll see right now. I'm going to show you what this pen looked like before I restored it. Then I'll show you some time-lapse video of the restoration process, and then show its parts and features, some size comparisons, and then do a writing sample. I'll talk a little bit about the history of this first generation Parker Vacumatic as well. I felt that I may have overpaid for this pen on the eBay auction, but as you'll see, the seller included a very nice Parker 21 as a bonus. So I feel really good about the purchase. And here's what the pen looked like when I got it from eBay. So it seems I've gone down the rabbit hole of the Parker Vacumatic. I've restored this golden pearl Vacumatic, and then I set out in search of either the blue pearl one or the burgundy pearl. And I found the burgundy pearl, and it has arrived. And we're going to open it up right now. Nicely packed in a Waterman box. And there it is. And it's full of ink. And he's giving me a Parker at the same time. So I did not buy this Parker. And what is it? It says it's a Parker made in Canada, 12 karat gold filled cap, and it's a Parker 51 aerometric. Well, in green. So I got most of the ink off of this thing. Hoo. Yeah, shipping full of ink. Not a good idea. Cap is absolutely chock full of ink. This is a beauty. Look at this. I overpaid for this, probably. It was at a cheap price up till a minute left in the auction. And I had a price that I would go maximum with, and I went over that price. But these are slightly rare. The burgundy color is highly sought after, certainly by me. The double jewels with the stacked celluloid, striped celluloid, are rare, and this is one of the first generations with the locking push button on it. Let's see if I can get a date code. It says 25, made in USA, PAT 25. I'll have to check my date codes. I think that means 1935. They changed their date codes later on, but I think that's the second quarter of 1935. But the section is the same material. This is a nib that needs some adjustment. That looks like there's glue on it or something like that. Not sure what that's about. But this is a beautiful pen. So we'll clean it out, and we'll clean up my hands, and we'll see what kind of restoration we can do on this mid-30s Parker Vacumatic in burgundy pearl. Gorgeous, gorgeous pen. The pen had already been semi-restored, and I found some interesting, let's call them adjustments, that were made by previous owners. So here's a time-lapse video of how I did further restoration. So I was able to successfully take the pen apart. I have not taken the clip off, or that end jewel. The clip sort of rotates a little bit, but I'm worried about damaging that, and these are so difficult to get. And I think it's in pretty good shape to begin with, so I'm not going to do much other than polish this up. I've also noticed there are some glue marks on here where those rings have been re-glued. It looks like cyanoacrylate glue on there. The section came off very, very easily. I didn't require any heat at all. It just unscrewed, and there's this long breather tube which just sits in there very, very slightly. It's easy to pull out. And that nib does need some work. I might try to tap it out of that section, but again, I'm very wary about splitting that celluloid. The back blind cap has been repaired or refit in some way or another. There's a cyanoacrylate crazy glue on the inside of that. It might have been even rethreaded. It's a nice job, actually. It's a little bit sloppy right there in terms of the play of the threads, not in terms of the workmanship. And it just barely goes on all the way. There's a little bit of a seam left. So I think this thing has been rebuilt. Again, these are hard to get, so I might just polish that up. I'm not going to even attempt to take that off. There's no need. Just break the pen. Lockdown filler works nicely, and it was kind of crunchy, and I thought maybe the sack needed to be replaced, but I was able to successfully remove the vac with my vac removal tool, and I applied a little bit of heat to it and was able to unscrew it. And you can see that the sack is in pretty good shape, and it actually works. I might end up replacing it anyway. It's still a bit tacky right there, and kind of a little bit ripped as well from taking it out and putting it back in again. So I might replace that, just have it brand new. But there are the parts. I'll probably knock that feed out of there because that nib needs some alignment and probably needs some polishing, and I want to get at that date code as well to see whether that in fact is a replacement nib. Everything's in good shape, so I'm going to now polish things up, and this is an opaque barrel. They came in both the opaque and the translucent barrels. Next step, polishing and replacing the sack. So in knocking the feed and the nib out of the section, I discovered a couple of things. This is a replacement nib, and I discovered that it's not gold.
It's full of gold. Veins of it. This stuff wouldn't pay a dinner for a carload. What, ain't gold? Pyrites. Fool's gold. Next time you fellas strike it rich, holler for me, will you, before we start flashing water around. Water's precious. Sometimes it can be more precious than gold.
There's no date code on that, but you can see all the gold plating is off of this steel nib. I'm going to fix this up, get those tines aligned properly. We'll clean that section out. I'll polish up that feed as well, ebonite feed, and we'll get it ready to go. And I've decided to replace this sack. So here's the pump from the Parker Vac, and I've taken the old sack off and scraped off all the remnants of it and cleaned it up with a little bit of quadruple O steel wool. First, before I resack it, show how this lockdown works. This is the first lockdown I've ever had. It's different than the later ones in that it has an aluminum cup, and it has this rod. It's an aluminum tube that has a spring inside it, and it moves back and forth like that on the spring, and it has a slot in it, and this is like a bayonet, locking bayonet. So there's a blade right there and a blade right there that stick on the inside, and when you push this down and give it a twist, it locks into that slot and stays down like this. So it actually extends the sack when it's in locked position. It means that the blind cap on it sits a lot shorter than later Vacumatics do. So I've got the new sack on my pellet pusher tool, and I'm going to push it into that opening. There we go. Relatively in there, and then I'm going to cut this to length, and then we put talc on the outside and roll it back on itself until it meets this little ledge right here. There we go. That took a little bit of work. It always does, but it seems to be in there snug now. So now I'll put some silicone grease on here, not for sealant, but for lubricant to get it into the barrel nicely, and on the end of this sack to make it slide nicely inside the barrel. So I use this relatively low viscosity silicone grease, more like silicone oil, a little dab there on the threads and here on the sack. Let it slide into the barrel nicely. And then our vac extractor tool is really useful again. Clamp down on that unit while I'm turning it into the barrel, and the barrel grips it when it's inside, like that, nice and tight. And there we go. Should be able to see that inside there. I can't over my camera, but I'm sure you can see that. And then we give it a twist, and it locks down, and we put our line cap back on. There we go. Now all we have to do is clean up the section and the feed and align that nib, and we'll have a working pen, hopefully. I've already polished up the barrel and the cap with some micro mesh, and it's looking glorious. So you might be able to see here how that nib is out of alignment. So I'm going to try to straighten it just by giving it a twist, by just bending one tine up slightly, try to get them to align naturally. Of course, the feed presses on them as well. And again, this is a steel nib, so it's going to take a little bit more pressure than a gold. Gold is softer than steel, and it's starting to look aligned now. Now, still misaligned when it's up against the feed. So I think we need to push one of the tines down. You can see in profile how one seems to be turned down, and the other one is straight. I'm going to use my nib smoothing tool and my plastic spudger and try to get that, so that left tine right there, I'm going to try to straighten it out a bit. There we go. That seems to be a lot straighter. It can probably be tuned and smoothed from there while it's in the pen. And I've polished up that feed so it's nice and shiny, and I think we're ready to put it in the section. So one of the issues I had with this pen when I took it apart, as I saw that the breather tube looks like a replacement. This looks modern to me, and it's not exactly the right size, and so it didn't really fit in there. What I did was I took my Dremel tool and just widened that open just a little bit, and I've also blown air through this little hole up here to make sure that there's a good channel between that little hole and this hole, and now that breather tube sits in there a little bit more snugly than it did before. I don't want that falling out inside the pen after I've closed it all up. So now I've given that section a nice polish, all nice and shined up. Aren't they gorgeous? Why they went to just straight black on these beautiful stacked celluloid pens, I have no idea. That section being the same as the barrel and the cap makes the pen just glorious, I think. Probably because that's probably difficult to make or expensive to make. So I'll just put that nib and feed together, and we'll press them into the section. Yeah, that's not looking too bad. It's a little bit further extended than it was originally, but I do have cap clearance, and we'll see how that writes. Okay, the moment of truth. The trick is turning that locking mechanism while it's still in the ink. And let's see how it writes. And this is a 1935 Parker Vacumatic, and it has a, I would call it a broad steel replacement nib. It's actually very smooth. It's got some feedback. I might polish it a bit. It's very wet. Wow. But I'm going to smooth that out a little bit more, and I think this is a beauty. And here is the pen restored. I was excited to finally get a first generation Vacumatic with a lockdown filler. I'll put a couple of links to the history of the Parker Vacumatic from Richard Binder's website and Tony Fishier's website in the description below. Most of this information comes from those sources. Although Parker had its profits cut in half during the years of the Great Depression, they continued to innovate. The Parker Duofold was already 12 years old by 1933. For 5 years, Parker had been developing a revolutionary new filling system for a new model to replace it. The industrial designer Joseph Platt was brought in by Parker to not only design the now famous Parker Aero clip, but to put his eye to the overall design of the new model. Platt went on to be a rather famous production designer in the film industry. designing such classic films as Hitchcock's Rebecca and The Paradigm Case, as well as 1939's Gone with the Wind. The original test market models were called Parker Golden Arrows, but by 1933, the revolutionary pump filler's function was preferred over the sleek new Art Deco form by the marketing department, and the model was renamed to the Parker Vacumatic. Parker touted their new filling system sackless, even though that wasn't necessarily true. The Vacumatic pump has a latex sac, but it was used as a pneumatic pump to fill the barrel of the pen, giving the Vacumatic a dramatically larger ink capacity. The first generation of Vacumatics produced from 1933 through 1937 had a plunger made of an aluminum tube with a spring inside and a bayonet locking system, where you push the plunger down and twist it to lock it down, hence the name lockdown filler. In 1937, the lockdown mechanism was discontinued and the aluminum plunger just remained at its full length, which required the blind cap to be increased in size. The second generation Vacumatics were known as speedline fillers. By 1942, the U.S. was at war and aluminum was needed for the war effort. So the aluminum was replaced with a thinner plastic plunger on the third and last generation of Vacumatics, which were phased out in 1948. You can see by comparing this first generation lockdown filler from 1935 with this third generation post-war speedline filler from 1945 that Parker had made some body changes as well, making the pen sleeker, and it posts a whole lot better than the first generation Vacumatic. While some features improved with the changes through the generations, some changes were not improvements. The loss of the double jewels and the replacement of the laminated celluloid jewels with solid plastic, plus the loss of the laminated celluloid on the sections, were detriments in my opinion. So let's take a closer look at this pen. Overall, the first generation Vacumatic is a mostly straight cylindrical pen with pointed end finials. It is very light, and the laminated Burgundy celluloid is really chatoyant and beautiful. Let's take a look at that, how it moves. This early Vacumatic celluloid was turned from solid rods, where later generation caps and barrels were made by wrapping sheets of celluloid around mandrels. From the top, we see the laminated celluloid jewel screwed into the cap to hold the plat-designed gold-filled Parker arrow clip. The cap is less streamlined than the later generation of Vacumatics. The three gold cap bands here at the end of the cap denotes that this is a top line Vacumatic. The bottom line Vacumatics had two cap bands. The barrel is straight to almost the end, where it tapers away to the blind cap, which has an end jewel of the same laminated celluloid. The barrel is engraved with G.O.S. Parker Vacumatic, made in the USA, PAT, and the date code 25, which stands for the second quarter of 1935. The blind cap unscrews to reveal the lockdown plunger, which has a knurled brass thumb screw button. The cap unscrews with one turn to reveal the concave section, which is made of the same material as the cap, barrel, and finial jewels, and a Parker replacement steel nib, which is medium, and the black ebonite feed. Let's take a closer look at this nib. It is a replacement nib because it says it's made in Canada and it's gold-plated steel, not gold. It is a Parker Arrow two-tone design, however. The original nib would have been a 14-karat gold Parker Arrow nib in either gold or two-tone gold with the arrow like this. There is no way of telling when this nib was replaced, but this pen has had some extensive work done to it, so I expect it is a recent replacement, although the nib is vintage. The inside of the cap shows the plastic cap liner, which is screwed together with the cap finial and clip. The cap posts, but not as deeply and securely as the later generation of Vacumatics. The cap is super light, so it doesn't backweight the pen at all. Unposted, the pen is plenty long enough and comfortable in the hand to write with. Now let's look at some size comparisons. And here is the 1935 Parker first generation Vacumatic in Burgundy pearl celluloid, with a 1945 Parker third generation Vacumatic in golden pearl celluloid, a 1940s Parker 51, a 1940s Schaefer Balance, and a 1940s Waterman Stalwart. Now let's look at them posted. And here they are posted. you can see how much better the third generation Vacuumatic posts than the first generation. But I'll take that section over that section any day of the week. And you can see how the Parker Aero clip evolved over the generations, with the early plat designed Parker Aero right there, and then the blue diamond Parker clip from the 1940s, and then the return of a stylized version of the original plat design Parker Aero clip on this 1940s Vacuumatic Parker 51. These three pens have not been restored. Now let's look at them unposted. And here they are unposted. This 14 karat gold Parker Aero clip in two-tone gold and silver is probably how the original nib looked on this one, much closer than the replacement anyway. And this nib here on the Waterman is sticking way out of the section because I'm in the process of restoring it. Now let's look at some measurements, and I'll be back with a writing sample. And we're back with the writing portion of the review. This is Clairefontaine 90 GSM paper, and this is a 1935 Parker Vacuumatic in Burgundy pearl, and it has a steel, I'm going to call it a medium nib. Let's check the wetness. As you can see, it's very wet indeed, and this nib is very smooth. Because after I aligned the bent tines, I smoothed it until there was just a whisper of feedback, and the nib is now perfect. And the ink is Waterman's Serenity Blue. And the Waterman's Serenity Blue is very safe for vintage celluloid pens that have latex sacks. You have to watch with celluloid Vacuumatics because unlike vintage pens that contain ink inside a latex sac, the ink comes in contact with the inside of the celluloid barrel on the Vacuumatics. Alkaline inks will literally eat celluloid for breakfast. Parker's own Superchrome ink from 1941, designed for the original Parker 51, was notoriously harmful to celluloid and even ate up some Parker 51s. Parker withdrew the ink in 1956, but Waterman inks are gentle on vintage pens. As to line variation, well, you can push it a little bit, but the interesting thing about this nib is that it behaves a little bit stub-like in that the horizontal line is slightly thinner than the vertical line. So you get some natural line variation with no pressure. Very pleasant indeed. So this nib makes a 0.6 millimeter line, which is a Western medium or a Japanese medium to broad on my Richard Binder line width chart, which you can find linked in the description below. And for our quote: and for some reverse writing, it's actually very nice. It's not that much thinner. And for some quick writing, very, very nice indeed. And you can see that natural line variation in there. So what are my thoughts on this pen resurrection? Well, I can't even call it a pen resurrection really, because this pen wasn't dead on arrival. There was a sack, the Vacuumatic pump worked, and the pen was able to write. But I'm still happy because I was able to replace the sack with a new one, clean and adjust the nib to where it now writes properly and is smooth and wet, and I was able to polish it up to almost new condition. The blind cap was a previous repair that still feels a little fragile, so I'm extra careful when removing and replacing it. The lockdown filler works nicely, but it's a little tricky to use as you have to keep the pen submerged in the ink while you twist the plunger, which isn't very easy to do. I can see why they changed it. But overall, I'm thrilled with this gorgeous first generation lockdown filler Vacuumatic. The color of the burgundy pearl is just incredible, and the camera doesn't really do justice to its chatoyance and gorgeous color. The first generation isn't as sleek and comfortable as the late generation Vacuumatics, but the laminated burgundy pearl celluloid on the section and the end finials on this pen really make up for that and make this a stunning vintage fountain pen, and it writes like a dream. And unless and until I find a medium broad 14 karat gold Parker Aero nib from this era to replace this Parker steel nib, this nib will do just fine. Or should I say medium. And there you have it. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and don't forget to ring that bell to get instant notifications whenever a new video is posted. And please look in the description for a link to Goldspot pens, as I'm now an affiliate of the online store, and when you shop at Goldspot using my link, you'll be supporting my channel as well at no extra charge to you. You can also join as a member of my channel for only 99 cents a month, and I guarantee I'll answer your comments in the comment section, and you'll get cool emojis and badges and sneak peek unboxing videos as well. And that just leaves it for me to say thank you for watching. And that's all she wrote.
I made this.